to interview Professor Marcelo Aebi for the European Society of Criminology Oral History project. We are in Bucharest in 2024, and Marcelo is a full professor of criminology in Switzerland. Throughout his career, he had many different positions in different countries. Currently he's also the executive secretary of the European Society of Criminology since more than 20 years. He's also the chairs of the expert group that produces periodically the European Sourcebook of Crime and Criminal Justice Statistics, in which I have the pleasure to collaborate as well. And as well as a scientific expert for the Council of Europe, he is responsible for the European Prison and Probation Statistics published annually by this institution, the Space 1 and 2 project. On a more personal note, he was born in Martinez, Buenos Aires, in Argentina in 1966, and has been living in Europe since 1992 because your family was Swiss, and then they emigrated to Argentina, and then he went back to Switzerland and to Europe. He completed his primary and secondary education in San Isidro. He studied law and criminology at University of Buenos Aires and University of Lausanne, respectively holding a degree in law and a post-degree in criminology, and then PhD with summa cum laude by University of Lausanne. During the postdoctoral period, he was a visiting scholar at Rutgers University in New Jersey and the Max Planck Institute in Freiburg in Germany. He has been a criminology professor in Spain, first at University of Seville in Andalusia, and later at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He also served as the deputy director of Seville section of the Andalusian Inter-University Institute of Criminology, as well as the School of Criminal Sciences at University of Lausanne, and I remember for many, many years. He received the Ferdinand Boulin Award from the International Association of French-Speaking Criminologists, ICLF, and the Faculty Award from the Law Faculty at University of Lausanne for the quality of the thesis. He's an honorary member of the Italian Society of Criminology, an honorary member of the Illustrious College of Lawyers of Cusco, Peru, and also honorary professor of José Carlos Mariátegui University in Moquegua in Peru. He's also a member of advisory board of various university centers and chairs the Scientific Committee of Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement, the NSCR, and in addition also he is a member of the editorial committee of various scientific journals specialized, of course, in criminology. He's author and co-author of more than 200 scientific texts published in many languages, in English, Spanish, French, Italian, Catalan, Macedonian, Turkish, and German. And it includes 12 books and dozens of articles specialized in criminology journals. His main research area are comparative criminology, penology, prisons and alternatives to imprisonment, juvenile delinquency, criticism of Marxist and postmodern criminology, and the relationship between drug use and crime. And he's also a fiction writer, and he has published a book of stories, Un Color Sepia, which I had the pleasure also to read. And on a personal note, myself, I knew Marcelo since 2014 at a conference about the cause of imprisonment, and then he was my professor of Introduction to Criminology, Research Methods, Juvenile Delinquency, and then my PhD supervisor. So, hello Marcelo.
Hello, thank you very much.
Can you tell me more about your beginnings in criminology? Because you started as a law graduate in Buenos Aires, and then you switched to criminology.
Yeah. Basically, I finished my law studies, which I found extremely boring, when I was 23. Then I started working as a lawyer for a couple of years and was quite deceived of the practice. Maybe I was I had romanticized too many movies about the lawyers. So I was a little bit, quite deceived by the practice. Although I learned a lot with, we had this system of free practice to help people without resources. And I learned a lot there from the people that were there, people that came to see us, and from the lawyers who were there, who were all visually disabled. It's very difficult to be a lawyer when you're visually disabled because clients do not trust you. So I was quite deceived about that. And I had always been a Swiss citizen. And I thought, okay, this is going to be my life for the next 42 years. And that is when I decided to come to Europe without a clear plan. So I came and I said, okay, let's try 5 years. And if I don't like it, I can always go back to Argentina and start at 30, which many people do. So I started validating my studies in law, which is a very difficult task because basically I had to renew everything. At least, if you go to Spain, maybe it's easier, but I went directly to Switzerland, so I had like 2 equivalences, international law and history of law, something like that, philosophy of law. And well, I started doing it. It's quite interesting to see the difference on how this is taught in Switzerland, which is very practical, very inductive from the cases to the law. And then one day, the professor of criminal law, José Hurtado Pozo, who is a Peruvian professor who did his research on his PhD on the imported law, because Peru imported the criminal code of Switzerland, which came into law earlier in Peru than in Switzerland. And he said there is this conference on death penalty this afternoon. I went there. The guy who was giving that was Juan Rabasa, who was at the time an assistant at the Institute of, which is now the School of Criminal Sciences in Lausanne. And I started discussing with him. The whole history is too long because it's a series of coincidences, of chances. I believe that chance plays a major role in life. And he said, well, what are you doing again all the studies? I have done half of them. There is this master degree, postgraduate degree at that time in criminology. And so I went to meet Martin Kilias, and he said, yeah, you're welcome. I did all the administrative tasks, and suddenly I was studying criminology. And we started 7, after 3 months we were only 3. It's quite different from now, because now we have 70 students starting. And the first day, I always remember this, Martin said to me, well, it's a period when people could talk freely without saying, I'm going to say something that's going to create a problem for this guy. He said, you come from the South, usually you talk too much when you come from the South. Here we try to be more pragmatic. And then he said, and please don't come here with Baratas ideas. That was like a red flag or green flag, saying, wow, what is this going to be? And then he started showing empirical criminology. Everything I had done until now was basically criminal law, and a hint of what was at that time the ideas of the new criminology of 1973, but taught 10 years later in a completely different context. And so I was really impressed by this empirical way of doing things. And of course, we were only 3. It was a very small institute. We could, a small group, and the institute was small at that time, because even the criminalistic sector of the School of Criminal Science was much smaller. I think there were 9 students or 10 in the same. So it's a completely different context. And then one day, when I was in the second year, Martin said, you know, I have a position for a research assistant. You seem very motivated, you're doing well in your exams. Would you be interested? And I said yes. And that is how somehow I entered. I mean, when I left Argentina in 1992, when I entered that boat, because I came by boat with the Costa Crociere, I remember, I mean, if you would have told me at that moment that 4 years later, 1996, I was going to be a research assistant in criminology, and 3 years later more I started teaching criminology, I would have never believed it. And say, no, that's it. Because it's not that I wanted to teach, it's not, my main vocation was literature, but I belong to a generation that learned that you must earn your life, you must be capable of living without depending on your parents. And so, yeah, it was like that at that time. So that is how basically I started criminology. And it's funny because since the beginning, I entered in projects that became very long-term projects. Now we talk a lot about sustainability, but the first thing Martin told me in the interview was, okay, you will start 1st December, but in November we have a meeting, or maybe it was 1st November, it was October, but before we have a meeting in Strasbourg, and I would need you to come. Now if you do that, I remember a couple of times hiring assistants, and they tell you, do not make them start before, there is a problem with the insurances. And so the first thing I did was take the train and go to Strasbourg, and enter the meeting of the European Society of Criminology. It was the first and large meeting when they had made a draft of the pilot study, and that day, the new project started, and I didn't have a lot of information. Martin said, take some notes, and he started noting everything. And he said, what are you doing? I'm taking notes. No, just the main ideas. But it's very difficult when you start to know which are the main ideas, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Martin was someone that would say he appreciated the initiative, so it was like better say sorry than please. So, for example, one major change in the European Search Book, the section on definitions, was put outside of the police part, because I was there in Lausanne saying, okay, I don't have any note about this, what should I do? And I needed to find a solution, and I said, I will put it here. Then we go back to Strasbourg 3 months later, and they say, why are the definitions there? And Martin said, if we put it there must be a very good reason. And we continued, and still today they are there. So yeah, I was very happy to enter that world, and that project is still going on 30 years later.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you say about luck, and about that you cannot imagine how your life will be, right? I remember you posted once, or you shared with me a postcard you sent maybe in 1993 to friends or to your family in Argentina, and you were writing, yeah, we are fine, we just arrived, and we are learning French, because of course you need to learn also French.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's quite curious. It's very nice to see how life continues, right? What did you like the most from criminology when you started?
I was completely overwhelmed by the idea of evidence-based research, because it's so far away from what I had learned before. The idea of, okay, you can test things, and I was, as you mentioned, I was there just at the right time, because I arrived to criminology, and on the one hand there is this European Source Book project, but on the other hand, Switzerland has just introduced a new drug policy, the 4 pillars policy, including harm reduction. And at that time, at the beginning, harm reduction was mainly distribution of material for injections, but then it was the methadone program. But at that moment, they took the decision, and it was a unique moment in time because you need a political agreement, and Switzerland is still a place where you can make compromises and agreements between the parties. It's very difficult in other places. And at that moment there was this idea, okay, let's try this. And it was a mystery, what's going to happen. And there was some, even if there was some kind of political agreement at the Federal Council, it's not that everyone was supporting this. There was a lot of pressure against that. And so we got the mandate to evaluate this, and I was lucky enough to be in that team. So we were measuring offending in very different ways, and also victimization, because we had the police records, we had court records, but we also were making self-reported delinquency studies with the people when they enter the program and after 6 months and 6 months and 6 months, and victimization. So it's quite unique to have all this data together. We were running also against time because the evaluation was needed, but the decrease in the frequency of offending was impressive, a 90% decrease. So it was a huge change, and I remember at that time we were going, every time we go to the United States, there was someone from the DEA intervening, saying you're sending the wrong message, but when you look today at the situation with opioids in the United States, 30 years later, the crisis they have, and when you look at Switzerland, where we reduced from those days, at that time we had 400 persons dying by overdose, which is a bad name, overdose, because it's usually a bad dose. You receive something that is purer than what you usually take, and at that time we had 70 homicides per year, now it's 50 more or less, and 400 people were dying by overdose. So I always, it's not that I'm surprised, because I'm more skeptical with years and less idealistic, but if you have a vaccine that can cure something and you do not use it, you will be judged. And we know that these programs work, not for everyone, not for all the, we never said it was good for cocaine, but you are reducing, you imagine the number of lives, 400 per year. If it was a vaccine and you were not using it, you would say, this is crazy, these people should be trialed and sent to jail. And with the drug addicts, it's like if they were not part of the society. At that moment, everyone says, no, it's a choice they made, which is, I found it completely unacceptable, but it is how it is. So in many, and you see the case with the United States is very clear. So I was happy to be in these two projects, and also at that moment we started with the community service as an alternative. The Swiss Criminal Code had this possibility of introducing measures that do not make punishment harder, but you can try them. It's something quite unique. And so the cantons were invited if they wanted to try how community service worked. And we were lucky enough to have, in the canton of Vaud, where Lausanne is, it was Alex Pegazzini, who later became a politician in the Italian part of Switzerland, Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And he was very much into science, and he said, okay, let's make a random trial. Get people with short sentences, randomly 1/3 would go to prison, which is what they had as a sanction, and 2/3 to community service. And then we did the same, they did the different kinds of analysis. Then André Vallotton came to replace Alex Pegazzini, and he also supported this. And the results were quite good. because the problem there is if you apply community service only to what we call the good risk, the one that you are almost sure that they are not going to commit any crime, then there is no real substitution, because in fact if you're sure they're not going to commit any crime, perhaps you don't need to sentence them.
Sure.
So the risk of net widening comes from the fact that you use it for the good risk. The idea is not, it works for everyone. It was not that the results were completely different, it's not that there's a magic solution, but the levels of recidivism were the same, and people who were sentenced to the main difference was a question that we were on the point of eliminating, because you had to reduce the question. It was the perception of how they had been treated by the criminal justice system. And this was very high in all the people that did community service, and also among the ones that were sentenced to prison, the group that accepted also the sentence, and they were the ones that had the lower levels of recidivism.
So really the procedural justice played a big role.
Yeah, there. Exactly. Although at that time we didn't call it like that, and we were mostly developing. The thing is that sometimes things pass at the high speed, and so we could have done maybe 10 or 20 more articles about that. But it was 2000, then I was starting my postdoc degree, so I was living in Switzerland and entering a different world. Then I got a position in Sevilla, and so I had to prepare the classes, and I stopped publishing on that, even if the database was still really impressive and we could have done more. But yeah, life goes on, and so you continue with other projects.
Yeah. And then also, Marcelo, you joined, or you founded the European Society of Criminology.
No, I didn't found. I was not part of the founding fathers. It's a very good question, because now that time has passed, it's 24 years of the European Society, and we will be celebrating next year in Athens the 25th anniversary. 1999, I was finishing my PhD. My daughter was born in November 1998, so I was finishing that, and Martin Kilias came. He had this. He didn't take coffee with us every day, but when he did it, he would usually, we were talking mainly about work, and he used these moments to put his ideas in order. It's like when you teach, you go with the ideas, and then they become even more clear for you. Yeah. And so I realized that he was doing that. Maurice Cusson also does the same in Canada. And so he said, we were discussing, because 15 March it was already at that time the deadline for the American Society of Criminology. And so we said, it would be interesting to go and present stuff about drugs. Okay, perfect. And then he said, I've been thinking about this. It's funny because we are 600 people crossing the Atlantic, 600 Europeans crossing the Atlantic to meet in the United States. This is completely crazy. Perhaps we should create a society. And so that year, and he mentioned that a couple of more times during the year, and probably started making some contacts, although I was not on that initiative. So when we went to the ASC in Toronto, he organized a dinner, and Josine Jungertas was there, Marian Junger, the daughter of Josine, was there, Michael Goldfredson was there, who's here also, who was in our session yesterday with his wife, I think, and also the wife of Martin Kilian. So in that context, he mentioned the idea of the European Society of Criminology. And he said we could perhaps gather together tomorrow again and see what happens. And then it went very quickly, because there was a meeting in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. I'm sure it was Amsterdam, but that was The Hague. There is a picture of that in there. And then the decision of creating the society was taken during 2000, and the first conference was organized in 2001. But by that moment, I was already gone. So I was in Sevilla. And so I attended the 2001 conference, which took place immediately after September 11, 2001, which is the event that changed the world as we knew it before, that ended that period of extreme, a very positive way of seeing things. I know in some places it was not the case, but even Eastern Europe, it was a hard time, but it was the entering democracy. The 90s were quite positive in general, the general atmosphere, you know. It's difficult to imagine now, we didn't realize how lucky we were at that moment. And so I came to Lausanne, went to that conference, then stayed in my parents' house, because my parents had left Argentina before I left it, in 1987. But at that time I was 21, I was studying, and my plans did not include. I wasn't expecting that. And then I went to visit my parents, and when I was with them, I tell them, you see, I'm in Rutgers, and we can see the Twin Towers. I left a map to my mother. Yeah, it's just across the Hudson River. Then I went back on 10th September, and we couldn't land because there was some storm going on. So I arrived. We were living at the campus with my wife at the time and my daughter, and then I took my daughter to the daycare center in the morning, and when I went to Rutgers, to the library where I had my office, and they were asking, how was it, the first conference, 300 people, what happened there, blah, blah, blah. I was explaining, and a guy came and said, did you hear the news? The plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. And that was the big change. That would lead us to another story, but I was in Rutgers, then I was at Max Planck too, and I started combining this with teaching in Seville. And so I went to the 2002 conference in Toledo, flying also from the States, because it was another period in the States. And then 2003 I was invited as a plenary speaker, which probably at that time I didn't realize how important it was. It was a smaller society, and much later I discovered, because he never said that part of this decision was my dear friend, and regretted friend, Hans von Hofer, who apparently was offered the plenary, to give the plenary, and he said, no, I prefer to encourage the new generation. And I had a very nice story with him when we were finishing the first European source book, because he was very skeptical about the possibility of publishing that. And so he was always asking for small changes. And one day he said, yeah, but here we put the percentage in a row, perhaps it's better in a column, so I changed, because we had done that work. I changed all that, then I brought it, and he said, why are the percentage now in growth? Because you asked for that. I'm sorry, can we go back? And then I remember that because it was Easter, and the next day he said, no, I prefer the new generation. So I made the plenary speech, and it was the first time I was writing alone on crime trends. And then they opened a position for the executive secretary. You must understand that it was a completely different situation with a few people. It was not clear who were the members and who were the ones attending the conference, people who they knew at that time. And so I presented my candidature, and the board elected me. So at the beginning, when I arrived, there were 20,000 euro in the bank. And really it was not clear because there had been 3 secretaries for each conference. The things were done mainly in Lausanne, not during the board meetings there was an executive secretary. I think it was Sebastian Rocher and maybe also Ana Albazzi Pedro, but not a stable position, and just to follow what was going on scientifically, but mainly all the finances were done in Lausanne, but by 3 different persons. So the first thing we did, Grace started at that moment with me, is okay, we have to put some order here to know where we are. So let's start by separating membership from participating in the conferences. So I signed the contract, and there is a picture of that in the newsletter, in the conference of 2004, so it's exactly 20 years. Ernesto Savona was the president at that time. And so I started thinking this is something that is going to last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or something like that. But at that time, the rotation inside the board was even, members are appointed for 3 years. At that time, there was a constant renewal because there was this fear of having always the same people in the board, you know. And so a few years later, I started, everyone was saying, Marcelo, pay attention. I was quite young, you know, when I was 38, I think. Pay attention to this, pay attention to that. And suddenly, after 5 years, I was, with the exception of Michael Tonry, who was there also for 10 years, I was the one who knew better how the society was running, and we started having a bit more people attending. The journal started to be published in 2004. The newsletter at that time was done by Michael Tonry, later by Chava Ghiori, and at the beginning we were meeting 3 times a year, and I learned so much with all these people. Yesterday we had the former president's dinner that we organize once a year, and I learned so much with all these persons. And then suddenly, in one moment, I think it was 2012, I said, well, maybe I have done my time here, but it's not difficult to, it's not easy, sorry, it's difficult to make the transition, because there are a lot of things going on. So in the end, I continued, and I will retire not long. I still have 6 years that I have to go. Yeah, then I will retire, but they always ask me to continue, and it's a job that I enjoy a lot. I know it takes out time of what you could be doing, writing articles, or publishing books. The ones that suffer were the books mainly, but it gave me so many satisfactions from a professional and personal point of view that it has compensated a lot. I mean, all these relationships, the board has always, everyone is working there with the goal of making things better. You don't have, you know, if you are inside a faculty department, there are all these internal fights everywhere. I mean, I've been in different universities in different countries. There are always these fights because one wants to go in one direction, the other one blocks it. It's very ideological at times, especially in criminology, and you have to make alliances. When you get a position here, it's a little bit boring. While here, everything is positive. So we want to go to places where we've never been. When we decided to go to Sarajevo, it was a huge bet, you know, a huge a decision. Okay, what's going to happen? But we had Almir Maljevic, and also with the entire support of Ana Guetos, who will become the president tomorrow, has been elected, which is like a perfect case of what the ESC represents, because Ana Guetos was the first person to get a fellowship from the ESC to attend the conference. Then, in time, she became an assistant professor, associate professor in Zagreb. She was a member of the board. He helped us with organization in Sarajevo, which was done by Amir, but with some support also from the Balkan Criminology Group. And now she will become the president. It's like a fairy tale. So when I see these kind of things, or the people that are happy to be here, how things have changed, the composition of the board, how different regions are represented, I'm always extremely happy for that. Yes, it takes a lot of time, but it gives mainly satisfactions.
That's lovely, Marcelo. And you learned also so much, I think, so much variety in criminology, because throughout all this discussion, all these board members, or the members with whom also you talk to, you need to assist, etc. How do you see the evolution of criminology, of European criminology?
Okay, I will answer this first. I will mention something, because all these talks I had, when I was starting to write fiction, I attended what they call in Argentina taller literario, literary workshop, and the professor, let's say, is Santiago Esper, who is a poet. And you're a poet, it's difficult to be very well known, but he's a major poet, very well known in the circles of poetry. And he was always teaching us. We will read something together and then present our stuff. And after those meetings, I was high. I was really high after, because it was like feeling that all your neurons are working at that moment. So that sensation is very difficult to get. When I was I started studying in Switzerland, in Fribourg, where we live, by the way. And there I had a group of friends. They were assistants and students of Spanish at the university. And we would have some meetings to discuss literature, and then there was a group of theater, and that was very hard. So theater was very useful then when you teach classes. And so this sensation of being high, I have it also sometimes after a class. But then I was thinking, especially during the pandemic, all these talks, they are lost. I mean, I will take them with me. I cannot transmit this. And I remember that Jorge Luis Borges said that Macedonio Fernandez was a great talker. If you read the literature of Macedonio Fernandez, to me it's something that does not appeal a lot. But everybody said that when he was talking, he was great. And so I thought, well, now we have this technology, and maybe I can go back to these persons and discuss with them, and this is where the idea of the podcast came. Right. And it's not, in my case, I like to work collaborative. And at that time, Lieven was at the board. And we were thinking, there was another way of thinking, in writing a little bit the history of European criminology. And the classic way would have been to ask different persons to write a chapter, and then you put all the chapters together, and then... But my experience with this kind of work is, unless you make it very structured, and in this case sometimes it doesn't work, everyone writes in his own style or her own style, and all the chapters are different and you cannot compare. Then I thought maybe these two things could be combined, and we started with the idea of the podcast. And what I realized is that the podcast, when you are at home and you are with someone that you know, because I would say 95% of the persons we interview more than 30 now, are persons that at one moment either I work with them at the European Society of Criminology, or I discuss with them. And so we started with this podcast. We made some episodes in French because there are a couple of researchers that cannot participate in this project because of the language. And then we decided to make a distinction with this one, which is more centered about the history of the persons, about the history of criminology in each country. And we realized that if you watch this episode, it's usually at least 1 hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. Persons that in these conditions perhaps talk 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so with these discussions, because you go through criminology in their country, but then you enter into things that they have done as research, and there I learned a lot. So what I see is there is an explosion of criminology that took place that coincides with the creation of the society. I cannot tell you, I'm a quantitative criminologist, but it's very difficult to measure which percentage of this growth of European criminology is due to the contribution of the European Society of Criminology. I don't know, but people started coming, and we supported whenever someone needed a letter of support to create a program. We did it, and so there is a correlation, a clear correlation there, and perhaps in part I think, and even from things that people tell you, whenever we go to a country, then criminology receives some extra support. You see it in the number of members the society has from this country, and also it puts the university in the criminological map, let's say. So I see this explosion. Of course, when you have explosion, I remember, the only thing I remember from the class I took from political economy was that success meant to complications, complexity, and complexity leads to a decay. The problem when you have so many persons is that people start organizing themselves in small groups. And then when you have all these small groups, you have to find a way of making them talk to each other, because otherwise they are involved in their own capsule, This is something that I learned a lot from Chris Eskridge, which I must mention, who is the executive director of the American Society of Criminology and has been for more than 30 years. So many times we sit and talk, and he comes to Lausanne from time to time. And his wife once told me that Chris says that the only guy in the world who can understand him is you, and the same is opposite, because it's like the same function. So I learned a lot also from him. I learned a lot from him, from Michael Tonry, way of dealing with stuff and writing, from Martin Kilias, of course. Yeah, of course there are more people, but there are 3 that I should mention. These are the 3 I should not forget, but I'm not making justice to other ones. I mentioned Hans also, Hans von Koffer. So now we have all these working groups, 30-something working groups, and to help them get together, we organize, we have the possibility of doing pre-conference workshops, and also we put them during the conference in the same room in consecutive hours, so that people can be together. And also, if you want to learn about some stuff, well, you are an outsider and you go there, okay, you can follow this and learn a lot at the end of the day. There are 2 ways of attending conferences. You go to see what you are doing, but the problem is that you usually know what is being done in your field. Of course, you will find some new things. And the other way is, and this, the first one who told me this is Krzysztof Krajewski, is you go and see something that you don't know anything about.
You learn about it.
And then you learn a new field. So that is quite good. But the problem is that these people are together all the time. There is a cohesion that creates. It's like like the research of Malcolm Klein in gangs. There is a cohesion that exists, and for example, what I have observed the last few years is less attendance to the plenary sessions. The plenary sessions used to be like a key moment of the annual conference, and now we have less attendance because people remain together and perhaps they say, okay, we can skip the plenary and discuss something else and maybe go out and see a little bit the city and maybe have lunch at the same time. So that is a challenge. And I think the major challenge has been not to take any specific direction, either in terms of research or in terms of ideology, which is even more delicate. So we managed to I think, and this is the merit of the board, to keep an open society, where all the fields are protected, encouraged, without saying, this is not criminology or this is too much ideology. I mean, all this diversity exists as long as none of these ways of doing criminology prevails. That's perfect. Yeah. For example, I don't like this idea of criminology off. Yeah, you have a multiplication. For me, there's only one criminology, and then there are subsections. But this is the trend now. It's very common to put labels. I've been trying to escape from labels my whole life because when you come from a different place and yesterday I was interviewing Manuel Eisner. I was on that chair, and when you spend a lot of time, I mean, I spent most of my life in Europe. There is a point in German. There is this word Heimat, the place where you feel at home. And this changes, And so when I go back to Argentina, I feel, culturally, I belong to that country, and you can see it when there is a football game. But at the same time, many times my friends from those days say, you say this because you live in Europe. Yeah. And when you are in Europe, you will never be 100%. And so I think that this position a little bit in the border of the society is useful for someone that works on society. So I was always a little bit like that. On the other side, I try to avoid doing research on the subjects that are very close to me, because first, it's almost impossible to be objective, and second, immediately they put a label on you. So for many years, I tried to avoid the label of the guy who comes from that. Or, then you realize that the labels will come anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So you learn to accept them. But that is how I try to live my life.
And it has been so lovely to talk to you, Marcelo, and I think that totally the society and yourself has such a pivotal role in a lot of people's careers and in just the evolution of how, just permitting the people to have a platform, a place where to meet and to know themselves and to exchange. I think, at least from what I can say, from my own generation, it has been really, really great.
Thank you very
thanks
much.
so much for that.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully we'll have another interview in some years.
I hope so, but then we can change the roles. Thank you very much.